Morning, everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation, Bubbling Up, What Did the Occoquan Model Find Beneath the Surface? My name is Ashley Studholm. I'm the Executive Director with the Prince William Conservation Alliance, and we are a grassroots environmental nonprofit working to build equitable and sustainable communities throughout Prince William County. And you can learn more about our work by going to our website, which is pwconserve.org. And here you'll find up-to-date information on the projects that we're working on, including our smart growth vision for Prince William County, which we're calling the 3 R's of reaching our potential: reimagine, reinvest, and redevelop, which calls for a smart growth paradigm to include sustainable drinking water, which you can see. Where's that fun? There we go. Which calls for the sustainable drinking water, which provides a framework on how to do that from a land use perspective. Because like we all know, the quality of the water in our reservoir is reflected in the health of our watershed. And this is seen, I heard one recent story about, that's highlighted in some of the streams we're seeing. One is in Catlet Branch, which is a perennial stream that flows into Broad Run. And recently, though, the Broad Run Conservancy has noted that this once perennial stream is becoming more and more seasonal. And it seems that may have been due to some of the development that occurred in the 90s, but it took decades to fully show the impact to the stream. So now that we're seeing the larger swaths of land being developed everywhere, from data centers and suburban sprawl pushing farther into our wooded and rural lands, as we pave over the land, we sever the connection with the groundwater, which is a source of drinking water, but also provides a lot of base flow for our perennial streams. So that's like what we saw potentially in Catlet Branch. And so the decisions that we're making today, we may not see the full impacts of these current land use changes for several decades to come. And the Occoquan Reservoir watershed is already one of the most urbanized drinking water watersheds in the country. So our window for being really active stewards is narrowing to ensure the long-term sustainability of this resource. And in fact, you can read our recent op-ed, if I can get here, that was published in the Prince William Times, to read a little bit more about how we are seeing this issue, and I can include that in the link below. So I would encourage you all to check that out and reach out to us if you want to talk more about our 3 R's vision, and potentially do a presentation with any group that you're associated with. Also on our website, you will find a list of our upcoming events on our calendar page. We do have last Sunday bird walks, but that would have been scheduled for this Sunday, but of course with the snowstorm that will be canceled. So you can catch us again in February. But coming up, we have our Native Plant Symposium. So you can join us February 14th and for Valentine's Day, and celebrate, our love for native plants. And then of course the Bluebell Festival, our annual festival, is on March 29th, and then a lobby day to go down to Richmond and advocate for transparency and accountability for data centers. Many of our programs we offer free of charge, even though they aren't free to organize and to host. but we are able to do that because of and ensure that these events are accessible to everyone because of the generosity of people like you. So if you like tonight's presentation and you see the value in our work, please consider hitting that donate button on our webpage. And whether it's $25 or $500, I can tell you that your contribution truly makes a difference and helps conservation efforts right here in Northern Virginia. And we can do this work because the community continues to value the work that we do. So thank you so much. We have a terrific lineup for you this evening. So we have opening remarks from Northern Virginia Regional Commission's Norm Goulet and the Director of Occoquan Monitoring Lab, Dr. Stan Grant. Then we'll dive into the presentation by Dr. Saksena, and who was one of the primary authors of the land use report of the long-awaited Occoquan model. And after his presentation, we'll host a Q&A. So for the meantime, please keep yourselves muted until that portion, but please feel free to actively use the chat and for questions or comments, and we'll circle back to any of those questions. As you noted, this presentation is being recorded and will be published to our YouTube channel, and you'll receive notification when that is uploaded because you registered for this event. You'll also receive a copy of the chat, so that'll include like the questions and any resources that we mention. And all right, so why don't we get started then? Norm, I'll pass the mic to you. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Well, thank you, Ashley. It's been a few years since I was last here with the Alliance. Yeah, it's definitely been probably about 4 or 5 years. For those of you who don't know who or what the Regional Commission is, the Northern Virginia Regional Commission is a regional council of 13 local governments in Northern Virginia. Each jurisdiction appoints one or more representatives from its governing body to serve on NVRC's board of 24 commissioners. Only elected officials may be appointed, and the number of jurisdictions is based on population. The commission's been around now for 60 years. Our chief role and function is on providing information, performing technical and professional services for its jurisdictions, and serving as a mechanism for regional cooperation and coordination. One of those regional programs has been the Occoquan Watershed. That program has been around since the mid 1980s. To give a little history on what we're actually here to talk about tonight, back in May of 2022, Dr. Grant and myself and a representative from DEQ, we were called in front of the Prince William County Board of Supervisors, essentially to give a state of the science as to the Occoquan Reservoir. If you remember, this was during the beginnings of the great data center controversies that began around that time frame. As part of that presentation, I had the unfortunate pleasure of telling the board that it was actually bad timing. We had just begun the process to update the Occoquan land use and to begin the model calibration. And that would take at least a year to finish and complete. And also, based on our prior experience with the model, it really is not capable or was not capable of discerning impacts at the scale that I know that they wanted to see. Nevertheless, in August of 22, the Prince William County Board of Supervisors passed resolution number 22-397. And in that resolution, the Board of Supervisors requested that NVRC conduct simulations using the Occoquan Watershed Reservoir model calibrated to the 2015 land use data sets to assess the potential changes in loading of nutrients and sediment associated with development in the Occoquan watershed to include Prince William County's comprehensive plan update, Pathway to 2040, revisions to their data center opportunity zone overlay district, and the proposed Prince William Digital Gateway Comprehensive Plan amendment. It's quite a mouthful, but that's exactly what it said. After receiving that, the Occoquan Technical Advisory Committee and the Occoquan Modeling Subcommittee met to discuss the request and to develop a path forward. It was decided that the path forward would be to perform a full assessment of the reservoirs and watersheds quality at the year 2040, along with projected future land use for all of the jurisdictions. The thought here was that we were not going to look at just what the impact for one jurisdiction was going to be. We wanted to know what the impact to the entire watershed was going to be at 2040. NVRC conveyed to the Prince William County BOS that it would take approximately 1 year to complete the assessment following the calibration of the 2015 model. And it would take probably another couple of months to write up the assessment. Let's see, look at my notes. I actually had to sit down and dig up all this history. By June of 23, NVRC requested approximately $176,000 from all of the Occoquan watersheds jurisdictions to undertake this assessment. By February of 2024, we received the confirmation from all the jurisdictions that they were going to fund this study, and the commission was allowed to go under contract with Virginia Tech to perform this analysis. So that's the history of how we got to where we are. As I said, we began in January 1, February 1 of 2024. The report was finalized late last year. It is now available on the commission's website. Dr. Siddharth is going to give you a presentation as to what went into the report, what went into the assessment, and what the assessment essentially told us at the end. So I think that's probably a good place. Well, actually, Stan's going to go next. We'll go with that.
Great. Thanks, Norm. If you can put the link to the report into the chat, that would be terrific.
Yeah, the link's actually going to be in the presentation, and everyone will be able to see it there.
Perfect. All right. Stan, I'll pass the mic over to you. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
All right, Ashley, thank you. And thanks, Norm, for teeing everything up. My name is Stanley Grant. I'm a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Virginia Tech and director of the Occoquan Watershed Monitoring Lab, which is located here in Manassas, not in Blacksburg. It's an interesting kind of arrangement. We are actually a lab in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Virginia Tech, but obviously physically displaced from the main campus in Blacksburg. And as Norm indicated, in the mid-'80s, as part of the Occoquan Watershed Monitoring Program, the lab was set up in an arrangement with Virginia Tech to basically monitor the watershed and the reservoir and basically provide the raw data needed to make key decisions about kind of water quality and water supply. I came on the scene more recently. I actually was a professor in Southern California at UC Irvine for many years and came to become director of the lab in 2018. So I'm a relative newcomer, but I've really enjoyed kind of working with all the smart people here and getting to understand the system and trying to kind of disentangle some of the challenges that this system faces. And so my charge, I'm kind of in the way of Siddharth giving his his remarks, but my charge was to provide a little bit of a kind of a sidebar, a little teaser of some things that we've done that are complementary to the modeling that Siddharth will be talking about. And in particular, I know that a lot of you are interested in PFAS and sodium. And just wanted to share that we are coming to the end of a 5-year National Science Foundation sponsored research program, which was aimed at trying to understand the drivers of salinization in the Occoquan Reservoir and their potential solution. And we called this it's a part of what NSF called the Growing Convergence Program, basically convergence being bringing many different disciplines together and then trying to tackle a societal grand challenge problem, in this case, sustainable drinking water for up to 1 million people here in the Northern Virginia region was our grand challenge. I was the principal investigator. I wrote the proposal. And kind of led a pretty large team. We had upwards of 100 folks all together. There were researchers on the biophysical side, on sort of social science and governance side, and then also a big stakeholder group. And the idea was, we call this our squid of convergence. The idea was to basically progressively work together to tackle what we thought at the time, this is kind of an early on slide, were the two major potential sources of salinization in the reservoir. One was reclaimed water from the Upper Occoquan Service Authority, and so we were kind of focused our first half of the project on that, and then in phase 2, we looked at watershed salinization. So anyway, we've been going at it for 5 years, published lots of papers, faculty, professors, it's publish or perish, right? So we've done a lot of that, but I wanted to share that we kind of put together the summary of it all in a paper that is coming out next month in a Nature journal called Communications, Earth and Environment. And so you can see Occoquan Reservoir there in lights and you can also see that we had a lot of different folks as co-authors, including Ashley. So we had water utility folks, we had water reclamation folks, we had watershed folks, and we had a lot of academics. So it's a large number of people coming together to try to solve this problem, really condensed down into one single article, kind of all of the factors that are playing into the salinization issue and what we might be able to do about it. And I think that Ashley probably just shared a link to the article. I said it wasn't published quite yet, but there's a preprint on the journal's website, and that's coming out again in final form in just a couple weeks. But, as with all things, our attention spans are short. So if you didn't want to read the abstract or read the article, you can just look at the pictogram, right? And so this is kind of the graphical summary of what we found. Our concern was rising sodium in the drinking water produced from the Occoquan Reservoir by the Griffith Drinking Water Treatment Plant. And what we found is that, not surprisingly, road salt is playing a role in that, especially during the winter. And if we look at some of the data up in the watersheds, we find that impervious levels as low as 3% on average can start having an impact on stream water quality. So it's both the hydrology and the water quality that's impacted by development for sure. So that's really a winter signal, not surprisingly. Reclaimed water is also a significant source of sodium in particular. That was what we were focused on. And the timing of that is really in the summer when dilution with watershed inflow is reduced because there's less water coming into the reservoir from the rest of the watershed. So that becomes kind of an outsized source during the summer. And then I guess one of the big surprises for me was that treatment chemicals used at the treatment plant itself were a big part of that signal. And basically, those treatment chemicals are not optional. They are needed to prevent corrosion in the drinking water supply. And the reason that they have to add, in this case, sodium hydroxide, it's a fascinating story having to do with sort of microbial ecology in the reservoir itself, which is producing acidity. So anyway, those are the major kind of causes or sources of the rising sodium, and then we outline in the article, some potential solutions that are being thought about or underway. So with that, I'm going to get out. I guess I wanted to say one more thing, that we've learned so much at the end of this NSF grant that it's really teeing up kind of the next thing that we're focused on, which is PFAS in the reservoir, and using a lot of the knowledge and expertise that was gained through this NSF project to tackle that through a Water Research Foundation sponsored project. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way and let Siddharth and his team talk about the wonderful work that they've done on the modeling side, over the last couple of years. So back to you, Ashley.
Thank you, Stan. And yeah, so now we'll move over to the main highlight of tonight. But as Stan mentioned, a lot of these, from salt to PFAS, land use and land use decisions, both directly and indirectly impact the quality of our streams and our reservoirs in a lot of really fascinating ways. And so Siddharth, thank you so much for being here, and we are ready to learn from you of what the model, the limitations and all the things that you put together for us tonight. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Ashley. Can you hear me well? Just want to make sure.
Yep, you're great.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for Norm and Stan for setting this stage, and Norm for talking a little bit about how we got to this project. My name is Siddharth Saksena. I'm an assistant professor in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Virginia Tech. And I have been part of this incredible team working at the Occoquan Watershed Monitoring Lab for over 5 years now. And really the tremendous thing about this work is that it's not just academics talking academic talk and just trying to tell the people what they think is right, but rather we are working very closely with all the jurisdictions that are part of the watershed, and they're really guiding us as we move along. So just to lay the foundation of, say, where this work kind of started, I know Norm talked about the timing of it all, but I do want to mention right out the gate that while I'm going to be talking about this model, in the last couple of years, our focus has truly moved away from the existing model, mainly because of the questions that started coming up in the past. And what we realized was what the approach that we had been using in the past was working great. We really need to step up our game in terms of what we can do and provide better water quantity as well as quality estimates on what's going on in the reservoir across not just the scales at which this model can work, but even finer scales. So with that being said, what we are going to talk about today, in this presentation, and as I give you an outline here, is we'll try to talk about setting the context of this study and why it was why we were asked to do that, what really is important with respect to the parameters that we're trying to test here. We will talk about how did we design this study, and mainly we will go into how did we go about building those projections for 2040, including not just the urbanization or the land use, land cover change projections, but also looking at a holistic approach, saying that if we are moving into the future, we need to think about not just changing land use, but also think about changing climate as it happens to be in the future. So we'll talk about how we went about developing both of those. But then I will talk about, the model simulations and the findings, and really talk about how we are using that to inform our future modeling efforts and really go into the path forward, which is what, our entire team is now really working towards. So, since I talked about the team, I did want to introduce the wonderful folks who've been a part of this project, and myself and Stan and Meg, who've been leading the project, along with Norm, who's been our guiding light throughout the way. But really, the work that you see that I'm going to be talking about is led by Dr. Lalit Pal and Dr. Vishwa Shah here, and Dr. Aidan Baran. These three folks kind of led this entire study that we're going to be talking about today. And then Rezwane and Shantanu and Julia and Ali have come in to help us with the new framework. So when I talk about the path forward, this is the team that's moving to do a lot of that work. Please feel free to interject if you do have any questions on any of these slides. I do have a lot of things to cover here. I'll try my best to explain in the best way possible. Okay, so I will start with just giving you a small introduction, and you know this better than I do, but the Occoquan watershed is our community's lifeline since it drains about 586 square miles in Northern Virginia, but it really is the heart of this region's water system because it provides drinking water supply to over 1 million people. And we have seen rapid changes in the land use due to urbanization for the watershed. And the idea of this study is that more development, it leads to less pervious land, which can change really how water moves through this region, which can have a lot of different implications. And that's what we're trying to figure out. So with this being said, why do we need a computer model for the watershed? Well, we had some of these major ideas as to why we wanted to do this. The model serves as a system that provides data for guiding the development and rezoning efforts. So we can help decide where it's safe and sustainable to build. The other objective is to protect our reservoir. Just sort of the primary objective here is that the water source stays clean and plentiful, and then also providing supporting data for regulation. So scientific data that's come out of this model that can inform regulatory decisions. We as Virginia Tech are providing this data that the stakeholders then can use and get make better informed decisions. So, I talked about a computer model here, but I do want to talk about the Occoquan model. And when I say the Occoquan model, I have added the word Occoquan legacy model here. So I do want to mention why we have this as the legacy model. The model has been operational since the 1980s. We have been using that model to provide data on what are the annual flow estimates, what are the nutrient loads, what are the sediment loads that are going into the reservoir from the watershed. The model has in the past supported stormwater BMP design applications, and the model has provided data to support USR discharge operations into the reservoir. So really, in several years, this model has been incredibly useful. But since we've been facing newer and more challenging questions, and we've had recent technological advances in the last decade or so that have really reduced its usability to a point where we actually, as a collective, decided that we need to make this model a legacy model and really think about a holistic approach for watershed modeling and management. And that is what we've sort of moved towards, which I will talk at the end about of this presentation. But because we were tasked to do this work a few years ago, we did have this Occoquan model in place. So I'm going to try to do my best to communicate what useful information we can gather. The model is still useful. And so we did do this study using the legacy model, and I'll try to talk about what useful things you could get out of this model from this study. So quickly going into how does the model function? And just to briefly explain what it does is we have a bunch of different inputs, including weather information, land use information, what's the soil looking like in the system, what's the topography like, because that informs how the water flows through the system. All of that data information goes into the model that has predefined equations. Now, some of them equations are really very well represented in terms of like representing the physical world with respect to how it actually works. Some of them are assumptions of conceptualizations of processes. So it's a combination of both some physical processes and some conceptualizations that have been integrated in it. And then you use that model essentially to input all of this data and tell us what the stream flow with respect to time might look like, or what the water quality parameters might look like. So in this current state, this model is restricted to producing nutrient loads, sediment loads, and flow. Those are the major things that we've been looking into with this legacy model. So just to give you a brief overview of, you might ask the question, right? Is this legacy model even accurate enough for us to trust its predictions? So I do want to mention that the model that we have is not just one model, although I will talk about it saying that it's the legacy model, but it's actually multiple models integrated together for each of these sub-watersheds that you are seeing here. And you can also see the county boundaries distributing this here. So just to give you an example of how does the model do in terms of its performance. So I just take an example of the upper Broad Run here. And then what you see in terms of, the model report card here. So there are some statistical parameters that are typical to hydrology that we use here, and that's what I have here. But just to explain, right, the model has about 70% R square, and what does that mean is that if the river truly goes up, does the model go up too? Then we have a parameter called the NSE, which relates to, reliability, just saying, you could just simply make a guess versus having this model, what would be better? So we have good to very good performance in that sense. The margin of error basically talks about, what's the gap between what the actual data is and what the model says, and that is satisfactory. There's definitely room to improve there. And then the bias is basically saying, is the model always, leaning too high or too low? And so in this case, the bias is acceptable, about plus 14%. So that is basically just an idea of model performance only for the stream flow in this watershed. So what's coming out of this upper Broad Run watershed over a 3-year period from 2013 to 2015. So what we did was we took this model as the base model for our future analysis, and we built similar models for each of these watersheds, and we do have report cards for each of those watersheds, and the performance statistics can be they're accessible through our previous reports. Okay. Now going into what are we really trying to answer with this study, and how did we go about designing this study? So the key question that we were trying to answer, simply saying, how would the watershed respond to increasing imperviousness, say, due to local development? And while we are doing that, we also need to understand what could be the potential impacts of future climatic conditions. So we basically, this was the key question that was tasked to us, and we tried to answer that through the modeling process here. When you talk about development and urbanization, this is something that slide that Stan presented that really informed this specific slide, just to show you how we went about this. And if you look at the imperviousness in the watershed, this is just actual data that we have for the Occoquan watershed. And if you look into this to this image here, you can see that the imperviousness or the growth is, say, in the red, which is depicted by the urban. Now, urban doesn't necessarily mean all of it is impervious. That's important to know, because urban could be open lots, urban could be medium intensity residential or low intensity residential. All of that is characterized here as urban. But we do see over the last several years that the urban acreage, as well as the percentage in the watershed, has been increasing. And as a result of that, this is again the National Land Cover Database output. You can see how the historical and LCD imperviousness is changing in the Occoquan watershed. So it really has been, on average, increasing over the past several years. This is sort of the good idea of what's happening to the land use land cover in the region. What about, say, the precipitation pattern, looking into some of the climate? So that's a slightly different story. The precipitation patterns, looking at several years, and these are just 3 gauges across the watershed that I'm giving you an example of here. These basically show that we do have certain years with extreme highs or extreme lows. By and large, what we're trying to understand here is, what's the scale of that extremities, and that's what we're estimating that could go up or down. So you may see the average may not really change over the years, but you might get years that are extremely high or extremely low, and then that kind of really informs how we need to prepare for extremities. So that's what we've been saying in terms of the precipitation patterns. So this is the past data, right? So this is basically saying, okay, this is our baseline. This is the past data. This is the model that we have looked at model performance, looked at the land use data as well as the precipitation patterns in the past. And we say for this study, go back and say, okay, now we know what the present is. Can we go into future and can we project imperviousness and can we project the future climate projections? So what that will do is we will have a baseline simulation for our present, and then we will have a future simulation or sets of future simulations for the assuming that impervious changes or climate changes and things like that. And using the same model, which is, sort of the report card that you saw is the calibrated model, we simulate both the present and the future and try to see how things change between the current and future with respect to the stream flow and with respect to the nutrients as well as the sediments. So this is sort of the basic outline of how we went about doing this study. So now when you go into, outline, you didn't just really do just two simulations, right? One's the future with land use versus climate change, and one is just, the current. We said, let's divide these things into different sets. One being, the today's snapshot, which in this case, the reference for us was the 2013 to 15 data set because that was the last period the model was calibrated for. The next scenario, the second scenario that we used was just assuming that we face the same climate. The climate doesn't really change. We don't see different extremes in the future, but just look at more development. So this is just assuming the climate remains the same. Development happens. The third one is development happens and we see typical changes that are projected or median changes in precipitation as well as the temperature in the future. And again, we simulated a 3-year period to include for our model in that sense. And then the final one was sort of like representing the worst case climate scenario where we are saying, okay, what if we look at the extreme changes in rain and temperature? How would that go about informing our system? So these sort of like what you will see is comparisons with respect to the blue here, the baseline here for each of these simulations. That's kind of how we went about simulating this. Okay, so now that we know these were the 4 simulations that we wanted, well, how do we actually build projections for land use? So the first thing was, how did we go about building the growth scenario? So I'll not go into a lot of details into this, but I will tell you what we did use was a machine learning derived land use change modeling approach. This is a standard approach in practice, has been used several times in a lot of different previously published studies. We used a software called TerSet 2020 model, which is actually a land use change model and does land use change analysis. What this does is it looks at 1 year of data, looks at the other year of data, and tries to figure out what has potentially caused the change. We provided all the possible things that can impact change, including, road networks, this population cover, and different types of things. That helps it train the machine learning model, and then what it produces is, okay, then we use it to predict say a specific data in the future. In this case, we use the model to predict, say, what happens in 2021. When we were okay with the simulations for 2021, we said, okay, now we have a decent model. Let's go and use the same model to project out into the future. So that's sort of the approach for projections. Now, what you do see here is these are not impervious projections. These are just those urban projections that I was talking about. And what you see here is as a percentage between 2016 and 2040, which was 2016 being our baseline calculation, we do see a reduction in almost all the categories in terms of where the development is basically coming out from. And all of that is going into this urban category, which basically suggests that urbanization is going to be about 40% or 39% by 2040. Now, this just means it's urban, doesn't mean that it is, all impervious or we have 40% impervious. It actually is much less than that. So when we look at this simulation, what we did was we send this out to the jurisdictions. We had this result, we send this out to them, and we basically said, well, look into this, try to tell us, on average, we're going to keep the overall change the same, but you tell us are the areas or the regions that we are projecting, are they accurate or not? We also looked at the performance of the model. So what we found was the model was doing pretty accurately in terms of the percentages, but in terms of where the change is happening, this is only about 70% accurate. So I do want to mention that right off the bat, that this is aerial coverage is great, but it's about 70% accurate with respect to the actual location. So the jurisdictions came back, provided us with some changes or modifications where they thought, well, development probably is going to occur in this region or that region, and we used that to assimilate the imperviousness changes, and then we used the urbanization projections that we had to actually come up with these impervious changes that you're seeing. So this is sort of the input to everything in terms of the growth scenario that we have in the model, where you see the model is divided into multiple segments. And what you can think of this is the lowest resolution, or at which the model is being run, right? Or this is the highest resolution at which the model is being run, basically saying the model is only, we have one sort of set of parameters for one of these segments, another set for another segment. And what you see here is essentially the scale at which the model can predict. Now what you see are impervious changes. These are averages. There are obviously locations with much higher impervious change, and there are locations with relatively lower impervious change coming from this analysis. And again, whether to say this again, this is about 70% accurate in terms of its projection capabilities. All right. So this was sort of our input to the model with respect to land use. Then we go about building these climate projections. And I will tell you, with these climate projections, you're going to see a lot of different terms that you may not have heard before in the past. And I will try to do my best to explain in the best way possible. But one thing I will say is that the climate projections that we have produced are state-of-the-art. We use a state-of-the-art methodology for that. We looked at every possible analysis that we could include, and so we really believe these are robust projections with respect to what the input data is that we have. So what was sort of the process for that is we said, well, we'll not just assume that one climate model is the best model. We will choose multiple models to see what the different global climate models are telling us, and then we will try to utilize that information to help inform our decision. So first thing is, we looked at these climate models and just explain what those might be. Different models assume different types of scenarios here. So each model might have a very high, a high, an intermediate, a low, or very low scenario with respect to emissions. And those emission scenarios inform what temperatures might look like in the future. And so temperatures then directly influence other variables in terms of precipitation, evapotranspiration, and those sort of things. For this study, we stuck with the intermediate scenario. And we looked at, this was our future climate scenario. And then we said, okay, let's look at all the different models that potentially we can for the region, not just rely on one modeling approach. Now, these climate models are big models, right? They produce information across the globe. So obviously the resolution might not be perfect. So in that case, we wanted to make sure that we did localize this data for our study. And so what we went about doing is a process called downscaling, which basically, if you see this example, it's essentially saying utilizing local information to increase the resolution of the data that the climate models are producing. And this is sort of the downscaling step here. And once you do that, you get more variability in terms of local impacts of that. And then what we did was all of these different models that you saw there, we said which one actually performs the best in our situation, we'll weight more. Whichever performs comparatively less with respect to historical data. So we looked at last 30 years of data and said which model actually did well, that's weighted higher, and the other ones weighted lower. And that's sort of the Bayesian statistical approach for doing that. And using these climate models, then we said, can we now, for the future, for the 3-year period in the future, predict how much change are we going to see in precipitation and temperature? So bottom line comes down to what's the change, which is what's the factor of change with respect to the current and the future. And that's what you get here. It's basically saying, well, this for the median projection, which is assuming that the median changes occur, what you see in this graph here is basically what those changes are. And what they mean essentially is for the month of say February, we see about 1.3, which means that the precipitation in the future compared to the historical is going to be about 1.3 times in terms of the monthly averages. Now, this doesn't mean that it's going to be absolutely every time 1.3. This is also, data collected for a bunch of different simulations and then assimilated to tell you what that really means. But just to tell you how it looks like, so imagine this was the precipitation that we had observed from 2013 to 15. If we applied these changes, you would see slight changes in precipitation. So where it actually goes down, the precipitation will go down. Where it actually goes up, the precipitation goes up. So that's basically the simplest way to explain what these changes mean. The other thing we did was, before the climate, we didn't just look at the median, but we said, well, look at the highest factor of change that can possibly occur. These are all simulations that we ran. Look at the highest factor of change and then produce this extreme future scenario where the precipitation patterns experience high variability as well as we'll get very high highs and low lows essentially in the system. So that's sort of the representative sampling that we did for the system. So bottom line here, the bottom line here was this is an example of the gauge Dulles, just trying, or actually this is an example of all the different gauges located in the watershed and looking at what the historical precipitation was at the annual scale compared to what the median future might look like or what the extreme future might look like. And by and large, what you just do find in this region in terms of the models that we did use for both the median as well as the extreme future, we are seeing increases in precipitation. Again, this does not mean that it's going to be every event is high. It just means that we're going to see more extreme events happening more frequently in the future. Okay, so a lot of information about what we actually did and how we did go about doing it, but then what did we actually find? So I'll try to move on to, when we used all of this data to run the model, what did we actually find after running the current and future scenarios? So I'll give you an example of some of these different watersheds that I just talked about and link it to say what impervious change did we see in the watershed, and then what were the outputs with respect to say the flows coming out of the watershed or with respect to the nutrient loads coming out of the watershed. And so first one that I have the example for is the Cedar Run, which is actually, majority of that is part of the Prince William County. And in terms of the projections that we did have, we did see that there was a substantial acreage change, about 1,200 acres of change, but because it's a big watershed, that's it's not a substantial change with respect to percent. It's only about a 1% change in impervious. So this is, say, our simulation of the historical. Then you add the land use, you do see some change happening in some of those simulations, which is just saying that if only development happened, what would look like if the same simulation was ran. And then when you add development along with that median climate, you get a different simulation. And then when you add development along with extreme climate, you see a difference. So it's very hard to analyze. Now, so I'm going to go to a very simple, again, this is a simple estimate of what really changes we are seeing in this case. Is just to look at the difference in mean flows, right? And again, as a researcher, when we do publish this, we're not going to really be using means, but just to explain this process here, this is a good way to look at it. So about a 1% change in impervious, we are seeing, about 1.41% change in mean daily stream flows. But when you do combine it with median climate, you see slightly more increased changes. And then when we have that extreme scenario, you see extreme change, which is about 11.4%. And the same thing you can see here in this image, but this is basically saying, well, filter out only the big storms here and tell us if the big storms are seeing a shift or not. So we do see slight shift with respect to each of those scenarios, but the extreme one's the only one that's, statistically a significant change in that sense. And then when you go to loads, what you see is the blue represents the current, and the same coloring scheme is followed everywhere in all the results, where the green represents just the growth and the other two represent median, combination of growth with the climate, which is median and extreme. And you do see that with respect to just the growth scenario, for only about a 1% change, there are some changes with respect to what we are seeing for, say, total phosphorus, or we're seeing, but not really much change with respect to, say, the TSS, or the total suspended solid loads here. And just to understand that as a percent, with a 1% change, total phosphorus does change. Total sediments really doesn't change much. And again, these are simulations from this model. Of course, if you use a different model, different approach, these results can obviously change. So that's something to also note. The second one being the lower Broad, which is again located in this region here. Some of that portion does intersect with the Prince William County here. This does, the projections do say that's about 5.7% change in impervious. So relatively higher change in imperviousness in this instance. And what does happen with that? Well, we start to see, some more changes with respect to what can happen with the peaks. Then you start to see, slightly more changes with respect to median. And then the extreme has, by and large, even the low flows sort of start to show up as higher in this situation. So what do we find here is, again, the impervious change being about 5.7%. The changes in mean daily flows are about 7% for just the urbanization or development scenarios. And then when you combine it with climate scenarios, you can see substantial changes with respect to the mean daily stream flows. And the same thing, sort of the extremes here, you start to see more variability, but by and large, the changes are tracked very fairly well with respect to the flows that you see here. Okay, now coming to loads for that, and again, higher impervious, higher changes in total loads, because loads are also a function of the flow, and so of course, with the flow is increasing, it's going to carry more loads as well into the reservoir. Same thing as terms of percentage, we see total phosphorus more reactive, and then you start to see slightly less changes with respect to total suspended solids and nitrates in this system. And the last example I have is for Lower Bull Run, and then this scenario is slightly different because this has the UOSA as well as part of the system. So we don't have 4, but we actually have 5 simulations, which basically I didn't talk about much, but we went about actually projecting out what the UOSA discharges might be, and we ran that simulation also in addition to the climate simulation only for this watershed, of course, because this is where UOSA is located. And what we see in terms of the changes here are, again, 4.5% change in impervious. We start to see differences tracking with respect to mean daily flows. And then while we are developing more, the forecasts for UOSA discharges are also higher, so that causes some change. And then the combined impacts of both climate as well as the extreme climate are also substantial when we see this. And same sort of function is followed with respect to phosphorus and NH3 in this case, but not necessarily TSS and nitrate nitrites with respect to what we are seeing here. Okay, so a lot of information again for all of you and for your eyes. So what did we see here? Let's summarize all of that information. So what, I just basically in this graph just plotted each of those watersheds with respect to what the percent impervious change was and what the mean daily flows that we saw in terms of the changes were with respect to the baseline. And the same thing we did for all of the others, annual loads for each of the other nutrients as well as the sediment here. And the bottom line being that if you see impervious change by a certain factor, there is an impact with respect to this legacy model and its performance. We said we know that we are not perfectly accurate with respect to multiple things, right? The model itself is like I showed you the results about, good to very good in some instances. The land use projections themselves have uncertainty, and regardless of how good we can do climate projections, they will always have uncertainty, right? So we also looked into, well, what if we randomly increase developed areas in the system? Then what would the model show in that case? So we went about saying, okay, let's increase imperviousness to about 10%, 15%, 20%, 25%. So this is imperviousness change by that factor, not the absolute imperviousness value. And then what you do see is well, increasing imperviousness, as it makes sense, right? More imperviousness, more changes in flows at the watershed level. Same sort of system that we find with respect to the other systems. But again, remember that these represent the projected development in the legacy model. Both were about 70% accurate. So there can be way more changes with respect to imperviousness. We may be missing some impacts. We may be aggregating some impacts and actually over predicting some of those impacts. So a lot of different things can happen, right? With what the results that we found here. So, coming to what really do these findings mean for the watershed, right? So concluding this part of this work, we did find that the urban land cover changed to 40% or 39%, I guess, to be precise, from 29% by 2040, as the projection showed. We were in terms of the projections area or the acreage of how much development we might see, we were doing pretty well. So this does not represent imperviousness, just urban land cover. More development does show that there are going to be higher flows, more nutrients, more sediments in the stream. That does track with respect to development. What I didn't talk about here was seasonal sensitivity. So if we went into, well, where is the change happening? Is it in the summer? Is it in the winter? We did see, like, because the flows are low in the summer, minor changes are more impactful in the summer. And so we did see some sensitivity to development, more sensitivity, I guess, to development during the summer. Now, when you talk about, sustained development under climate variability, which were our, the two other scenarios. So rain does, we do predict that the amount of precipitation on average that we might see would be higher. And then that might be a function of flashier storms rather than, more rainfall throughout the year. Coupled with development, the climate variability has, much more significant impact. So when you combine these two together, things start to really change with respect to what the impacts on the stream flow levels are, as well as the watershed health, limited to the nutrients and sediments. And then what we really came out with this report was, what some good things, right? With the change that we saw, all of the things that have been done using some of the data in the past from the legacy model and what the lab's been doing in terms of the monitoring of the watershed, they've been really success stories, and we do recommend continued and improved monitoring in the watershed. We do need to have these scenarios in place that are representative of the median changes as well as the extreme changes in the weather. And if we are ready with those scenarios and we have plans in place to address them, that's really going to be great. But what we did find from, while we were doing this study or even before the study was we really need to modernize the watershed modeling capabilities to be, more prepared. And that's what brings me to the last part of the presentation, which is the path forward, is what are we going to do about some of the issues that we've had in the past with the model. So simply put, we do need an upgrade. There are several limitations of this existing model that has served us very well in the past, but with the changing needs, with the changing questions, one thing we can't see is we can't really go neighborhood level, right? So if you're thinking about, well, if you have an impervious area coming because of a data center, this model is not capable of aggregating that information at a fine scale, right? Because it's looking only at those segment levels. The other thing is this model requires a lot of manual work to add new data. So thing is, someone might come to us and say, we need a simulation for the next 3 years. And it used to take us 6 months to just come up with those simulations. Now that becomes really hard because when you're trying to plan for the future, you need to know a lot of information about different scenarios so you can make informed decisions, but you also need the ability to get answers to questions quickly. And then finally, because it's manual, we can't run a bunch of different scenarios for the future. We did run 3 sets of scenarios, but really we could look at all the plethora of options that are out there with respect to imperviousness, the sensitivity to development, the sensitivity to climate. We can run thousands of simulations with what we have in the current technology, which this model doesn't allow us to do. So we do need a sharper, faster, more flexible tool for tomorrow's challenges. So the jurisdictions that are part of the Occoquan Technical Advisory Committee are aware of this, and over the last 3 years, that is what we've been working towards, is how can we revolutionize the modeling of the system. And so what we've been working on over the last couple of years is something called the Occoquan Watershed Modeling Framework, which is not one model per se, which is not one approach per se, but rather saying we have a suite of smart models that can answer not just one question, but these different types of questions that the stakeholders might have. To have adaptable and open technology that grows with our needs, we can add in different approaches or different models as we need to in a framework that is built with as the baseline being scientifically rigorous models. So the idea being, can we look into neighborhood scale? Can we look into aggregate scale? Can we get a fast decision? Can we get a more accurate decision? All of those different types of questions we're trying to address with this Occoquan Watershed Modeling Framework. We are trying to bring in automation of a lot of these tasks within the system so that we can handle huge amounts of data quickly. We are trying to move towards even real-time insights with this system. And then we are also integrating and this work hasn't been completely done, but we are in year 2 of our development of, say, a 5-year project that really, would look like a suite of smart models working with a user interface to help guide the technical advisory committee to make those informed decisions. So I'll give you an example of what we've been able to accomplish in the last 1.5 years with that work. So I mentioned, well, our land cover projection accuracy wasn't perfect, right? It was about 70%. So we know it was good at the aerial coverage. So how much might be developed, we were good at, but we don't know location. So to do that, we used advanced deep learning to pinpoint future growth with much higher accuracy. And I will not go into what this essentially means here, but it's a combination of like the convolution neural network along with LSTMs to do future projections better. So we built our in-house growth projection tool. Now we're not relying on the Terset tool. It's in-house at Virginia Tech that we've developed this that can better predict the future. And just to show you an example of now what we can do is, these were sort of the locational accuracies. Like I mentioned, the aggregate was about 70%, but that was largely informed by good performance in some segments. And in some segments, we were not getting as good a performance. But the new system with the deep learning model is close to over 85% accuracy in most cases, and even over 90% accuracy for projecting in terms of comparison between 10 years of data. So we are now more confident projecting out into the future because we have a better model that has learned from the past data and can predict better. The other question that we really wanted to answer was, can we provide more reliable answers? How can we, run all these multiverse of scenarios that we have, right? So to do that, we have automated key processes, and we have started accounting for uncertainty to stress test the model to provide data that is not just based on one run or one simulation, but rather all possible combinations of things that can happen. So what I was talking about, that factor of change, well, can be very different. It doesn't have to be just one line here. It can be in this range, and we can run all of these different values. So it could be 1,000 simulations that now we can run and produce those results to better inform them. We also needed improved accuracy. So now this is just an example of one of the models in the suite of the new OWMF that talks about the same exact statistics that I showed you earlier. And now you start to see that we are getting very good to excellent results in terms of the performance for the same time step. And we're not just doing this time step, but we've actually been able to run this for up to 2019. And we're trying to get this more in one of the suite of these models to actually be real time recently. The other thing we're trying to do is seeing the neighborhood level. Well, we did have this question. Well, if we have development in a small segment, a small area, or a small acre development, we miss local information from that legacy model. So part of this system is hyper-resolution models that can actually tell us very fine scale developmental impacts. So you could potentially have this model that's running. You could click on any small location within that model, and each location we can get to see what's the level of water looking like, and then we can make informed decisions based on that. So much higher resolution. This is again the example of the same upper Bull Run watershed in this case. And finally, we're trying to track modern pollutants, and Stan did allude to some of this, right? And this really talks about, not just focusing on traditional water health markers like sediment and nutrients, but adding pollutants of concern, so PFAS and salt. And this is where, Stan's amazing knowledge does come into the foray, and we're trying to integrate a lot of their work with what the modeling approaches might look like, so that we can produce, diverse array of scientific approaches to better model the future. Okay, so the future outlook. We are moving towards smarter, flexible Occoquan Watershed Modeling Framework. We have moved forward from the challenges of the past in terms of, manual simulation being slow and static and coarse and all of those things, to moving to a dynamic system that can learn, it can adapt, it can evolve with respect to watershed changes. It can quantify uncertainty and provide more informed data, essentially, for long-term watershed management. And so, hopefully, with all of this work that is being done, we can then provide decision-ready insights rather than just some data that you might make sense of, and provide faster, smarter data as well that is available to everyone. So with that, I do want to say a big thank you to the Occoquan Technical Advisory Committee, who've been really helpful in designing this entire work and telling us what we need to do. The link to the report for the land use work that we refer it to as the Land Use Impacts Modeling and Assessment Report. So the LIMA report is available on this link. And then do want to, again, say thanks to our AI aid Google Gemini for helping us with some of those images. And so with that, I will stop and hopefully be ready for some questions here.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. I'm sure that we'll have a lot of questions, but that was really insightful to get an overview of the process and what some of the results of the model was, and then some of the limitations as well. Ken Grimm, do you want to unmute and come in and get us started? And we'll go with Ken, and then from there, Elizabeth, if you have a question, you can go next, and then we'll go to Roger. I see that you have a couple of questions. So Ken, do you want to come on in? And we also, so Siddharth, you'll have Norm and Stan that you all can chime in as needed. And if you have any other folks on here that participated, they can support in answering questions as well.
Yes, I'd like to repeat my question. I am concerned about the quantization associated with the model currently, and I'm familiar with that limitation that regards how land cover codes have changed. But I wonder if the same quantization might apply to the runoff, which might occur during construction, that is to say, as land cover changes change, land cover changes codes. So I'm worried about the runoff.
And I think so that's a great question, right? Trying to predict that in terms of runoff, the model that we have currently does have the capability of being able to estimate runoff to a certain degree of accuracy. But again, it does come down to what are we missing again in the process, right? So if land use changes, yes, there's going to be more impervious and more runoff, and we can capture some of that. But then are there stormwater infrastructure that is being put into the model? We're not capturing some of that with the current framework. So the pipe network and everything, and water can move in different directions. This model is just assuming that it's surface runoff essentially. So, although we are saying that this is impact of land use, land cover change, whether it's to runoff, even if we just restrict it to say just runoff, even then we are missing some of those key things that might actually influence that. So it could be higher, it could be lower with respect to that, but that's why we want to understand what's the range of possible options for those changes and how we can quantify that. I don't know if it helped answer your question or provide some perspective at least.
Well, I've seen earlier studies which predict enormous runoff during construction, and if it's not all contained properly, a good part of it will end up in the watershed. not only as sediment, but as
Oh, I see. So you're talking more about during construction,
yes, that's right.
whether why during the process of construction. I do see that. So that's a great question, right? And that is something that we will to be able to do that. To answer the question, right now we are not doing that, or we don't have the capability to do that with the system that we have currently. Having said that, if we were working directly and we did have access to that data where, where are we gonna see the construction, what type of flows are we gonna see outside of the model, we can certainly build something through the Occoquan Watershed Modeling Framework that can potentially help with some of that. But I will have to say that, that's again a very specific time-bound process. But there's a good example of something like that. Maybe Stan, you do want to talk about, a study that you recently did, not with respect to runoff, but with respect to, the diversion of the flows in the lake and really being able to monitor that. So I think it's a more monitoring question for real-time construction than it is a modeling question.
Yeah, so let me jump in here too. Part of the problem, Ken, is the variability that is associated with construction. If a developer comes in and follows the rules and puts in the BMPs and everything as it's supposed to be, the impact, while there will be an impact, the impact hopefully is mitigated to some degree. When you have a developer that comes in and doesn't follow the rules, the impact is significantly greater. And there's just no way that a model will be able to figure out whether or not the BMPs and the protection devices are being put in as required. So in order to, it's virtually impossible for a model to be able to predict what's going to be coming off of a construction site.
Nevertheless, runoff is a major source of contamination, and it seems to me
Mhm.
that some effort should be made to enforce restrictions about runoff, if that's the case, or at least to determine by some monitoring technique how much contribution that makes to the watershed deterioration. And it seems to me it's a major source of contamination.
Yeah, in terms of the enforcement aspect, that is beyond the realm of what we're involved with.
All right, thank you.
I guess
It's a
the only
really
thing.
good. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ashley.
I was just going to say it's a good point, and one that we raised when the Prince William Digital Gateway was being discussed, and and some of the predictions. I mean, you could see truckloads, equivalent of truckloads of sedimentation ending up in our streams as a result of that development. So it's definitely a concern. Go ahead, Stan.
Well, I was just going to say that the question in my mind, one of the things that came to mind as I was listening was, do we have the data that would be required to properly calibrate really fine scale models that were, for example, examining runoff during construction. And not to say that hasn't been done. There's a vast literature on these types of questions, but practices have changed. The kinds of construction that we're talking about is different, and in a way, we're kind of in a new regime, right? We have these data centers going in; they're very unusual. So I think that from my perspective, what we're missing potentially is that fine scale information, right, for the monitoring. And the monitoring program that we have currently under the Occoquan Watershed Monitoring Program is amazing. It's a long data set. It's really fantastic. The paper that I shared, utilized that, I think, to a very successful degree. But it's a very relatively coarse data set, and that reflects the fact that the original Occoquan model was fairly coarse in its resolution as well. And so they were matched up in a way. The monitoring program was matched with the coarseness of the model. Now you start getting into these more granular problems, and without the the data at that scale, you're a little bit guessing, all right? And the physics, of course, is going to be the same. We know what the physics is, but these models have to be calibrated. And I think the other thing that becomes very, very difficult, especially at that scale, is the water quality side. So, maybe we have more success without a lot of data predicting runoff volumes. But there's a lot of things going on, chemistry, physics, biology, and so on, human behavior, right? With respect to, I don't know, de-icers. I mean, you live in the Occoquan, you probably have seen, like I've seen in my neighborhood, the applicators will come along and shove salt out, probably because they're paid by the pound to deposit it, right? And so they leave big mounds of salt, and so anyway, that human behavior is very difficult to predict. Machine learning might help us with that, but it requires data, right? And so you're not going to learn anything without data. So anyway, that's my drum I'd beat. I think the long-term trends and the big changes, we can see that very clearly in the data, but all of the decisions are made locally, and at the very fine scale, and we don't necessarily have the kind of information that we need to help guide those kinds of decisions. So anyway, that's my soapbox.
Thank you for the responses. I would just refer you to a 2024 study by one of the environmental agencies that made a prediction of what the runoff might be should the digital gateway be built as proposed. It's hundreds of tons of sediment that's not contained. And the method used to make those predictions is documented in that report. It might be of value to the working group.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, and I think one thing is clear, and it's reflected in our 3Rs and our smart growth vision, is where we develop really matters, and really prioritizing the open space in the wooded areas that we currently have will be really important moving forward, certainly. And that's actually reflected in the ICPRBs. They recently released a map of prioritizing land use and conservation, and it aligns really well with what our vision is. So I'll go to, I'm not sure, Elizabeth, if you want to unmute and come in and ask a question.
Thank you. I didn't see anything in the model addressing the groundwater element. And since within the county, 21% of the water supply is directly to groundwater through the Bull Run, the Evergreen systems, and private wells. In addition, it is a large contributor to base flow and to the Occoquan itself. It contributes about 20% directly to the Occoquan and is the base flow of all the streams. Also, because the precipitation isn't all going into flashiness, it moderates the flooding element. It improves the quality of the water, and it would seem to impact the sustainability, the viability in terms of quantity and quality of the water supply to the Occoquan, and would be an essential element. If you cannot practically catch all the stormwater that once went into the ground if you have enough imperviousness. So that if you don't address it, I think that's an important element. I didn't see it touched upon at all.
You're absolutely right. The groundwater impacts for this part of the study were not touched at all. The model does have groundwater in terms of buckets. I would say, simply put, it's just basically saying the model allows water to go in the soil. So that is being done. It does allow water to infiltrate. How much of that infiltration goes into the groundwater is all conceptual in the model, right? So it's like a bucket water going into it. So that I agree 100% that in the current legacy modeling approach, that is not considered. Having said that, in the OWMF, one of the models that we are using, what we are trying to do is to not, well, we still can't really, estimate exactly where the water table might be at all times in the location, but we are including a high resolution, more physically based simulation that connects to the surface water and the groundwater, so that we can potentially predict what regions will have high recharge, what regions do have high recharge, what regions may not have high recharge. So answering, some of the questions like if we have more impervious, what could happen to recharge zones in certain areas? We will be taking some steps forward in that direction with this new framework. So we will have some of those capabilities. Stan.
We found in another study in another location that when we used several models and machine learning, we started to have distortion by correlation. We were fitting the model to the data, and it was non-predictive.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you there too. And the difference here is we're not using the suite of models to answer the same question or basically calibrate them to the same things. What we're trying to answer is, well, if you have a question that you need an answer for tomorrow, we will use our Cursor model that can only provide information at the aggregate level, and then basically give you like an overview. Versus if you come up with a question that talks about, well, this is where the development might be, could we potentially see what the increase in runoff might be for that? We will use a different suite of model to do that, or we'll use a different model altogether, which will take time to do. But the idea being the questions define what approach we use rather than using bunch of sets of models for answering the same question. So hope that helps. Yeah, Stan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that in parallel, outside of the project that we're hearing about today, Mark Widdowson at Virginia Tech is leading a team together with the U.S. Geological Survey to do a groundwater assessment for Prince William County, funded by Prince William County. So Madden, I see you're on the call. I don't know if you wanted to share any thoughts on that, but it is essentially just getting underway. And one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about was the sort of connection between that effort and then how does that information kind of feed in the hydrogeology that we learn about, infiltration rates and so on across the county and across the watershed. How does that feed into Siddharth's effort? Obviously, they're connected. Just like Elizabeth said, basically the rain falls and it has to go somewhere, right? It's going to get partitioned into runoff. It's going to get partitioned into infiltration. That's going to become groundwater. That could lead to base flow and so on. So having that kind of holistic perspective is kind of where we're heading. But the truth is that the hydrogeology here is very complex. This is what I've been told. I'm not a hydrogeologist. And so, it's definitely something that we're looking at and working on. And I'm looking for, maybe we can have another one of these meetings down the road where Mark and his USGS team, share what they found on that. And I guess the other thing that I would say is that just like Siddharth was saying, there's a sort of suite of models that allow you to look at different aspects of the problem. There are also some models that we've been playing with that are called transit time models that essentially look at all of these flow paths, right, through the vadose, through groundwater, direct engineered drainage, input to the stream. And basically take all of that information about how long it takes for water to move through those different flow paths in response to changing rainfall, and then compute what the impacts of water quality are. So anyway, there's definitely, I just in fact submitted a revision to a paper that's going to water research revision for that, and basically we were looking at Flat Lake Branch, which is in the watershed. And looking at de-icers and basically saying, can we take climate and Salt Institute guidelines for de-icer application, and predict on a daily basis or even an hourly basis what the salt concentration, chloride concentration is going to be in the stream. And we did really, really well with that. Very simple model. And the coolest thing is it's interactive. So you can basically look at different scenarios of the future and see what that's going to play out. How's that going to play out in terms of stream chloride and then ultimately stream health. So anyway, that I think that these are all really incredible questions. I see a lot of other questions in the chat that are a lot of fun too, but
Yeah.
I'll turn it back over to Ashley.
Yeah, let me pile onto that one also, Elizabeth. Part of the problem, and I'll use that word loosely, is that we have a very educated residents in Northern Virginia. And the questions that we get from the residents, quite frankly, often exceed our level of knowledge. Um, a good, for instance, is this the well study that we were just discussing. The genesis of that study began several years before Tom Smith left Prince William County. That's how long it took to get us to the point of being able to look at the groundwater in Prince William County. It's that many years. So the questions come faster than we can actually generate the knowledge. And that's one of the problems we run into. Stan's laughing because he's fully aware of that one.
I'm laughing
But
because my
didn't
wife is throwing
Stan,
spitballs at me.
Yeah, I see Megan in the background over there.
wasn't the original decision by Prince William County that a groundwater study was more expensive than it was worth?
I can't answer that question. I can tell you that I was involved with Tom and USGS and Madden and a few other folks looking at how much it was going to cost and designing what that was. I can't answer, as to how the decisions were put together.
I believe Tom's memo said that he recommended against it. So that might be a little reason why it took that long to get it.
I'm Madden with Prince William County. I don't think Tom Smith was against the study. The issue was to model groundwater, it takes many, many years. It takes a longer period of time.
Decades.
Yeah.
Might
Yes.
as well start yesterday.
Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah.
tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, our study does not include the water quality component.
Yeah, so while we're all having we all have a lot of questions, and perhaps the models and the data isn't there, so we should perhaps err on the side of caution, which doesn't seem to be what we're doing at the rate of the data centers being built and the housing being improved. I'm going to go with Roger, Kevin, David Peterson. So Roger, why don't you unmute and come on in?
I think I might have another one of those unanswerable questions because my concern is that the government officials don't have the level of knowledge to understand this wonderful report and all the work that you guys did, all the model improvements, et cetera. And so therefore they will ignore any recommendations that you might have. And I was trying to think what can be done to make it understandable to our local government officials or to the DEQ so that we get some real results and make improvements. And the point made about maybe we don't have enough information to to answer these questions. Well, can we also say there's a lot of risk in what we're doing with all the developments, so we should stop because there's more risk to our water in other areas, so we should just stop and understand it before we keep going. So maybe that's more of a comment.
Anyone else want to chime in on that?
Yeah, no, I think that your point is well taken. Sort of my social scientist friends would say that many of these grand challenges are not knowledge deficit problems. They're political, economic,
Yep.
other kind of social factors are really driving the decision making. And so, as a scientist, I always see the knowledge deficits, right? I guess the other thing I would say is that whether we like it or not at this moment, there are a number of experiments being played out, in the watershed. There is development going on, and there's
Yes.
kinds of development going on with different levels of care taken, to protecting environmental or sort of downstream, endpoints. And so these are all lost opportunities in a way, right? We could be out there tracking, the best practices, rewarding the people who are doing the right thing, and then maybe, trying to provide the data to straighten out people or groups that are not. And so, again, for me, it comes down to you're really taking the very coarse data collection systems that we've had in place for many years and modernizing them to some extent, automating, using sensors, but really trying to get that finer scale information that's targeted at all these experiments that are playing out, whether we want them to or not.
And this is Roger again. I don't think we have to have all of the technical answers to come to the right conclusions and make the right decisions going forward. On the other hand, I question, are there any supervisors or aides to supervisors on the call now? Probably not. But how do we make what you guys presented simple enough for them to understand and then act on the results? That's to me, that's always a challenge, trying to dumb things down enough for people who are involved. I mean, I just heard today that the delegates in Richmond probably have 2,000 bills on their desks to take care of in the few weeks that they're in session. So it's hard with so much information for someone to make decisions unless I say, okay, I'm just going to follow what Norm Goulet says, and whatever recommendations he puts out there, we'll go with it. Okay, that can be a way to go, move forward. But anyway.
So
Thanks, Roger.
the reality of the situation is, even if it were made understandable to supervisors or staff, it would not change the way they are currently deciding.
Well said. Sadly.
All right, we're gonna go to, we have Kevin, David, and then Veronica. So Kevin, did you want to come in?
I had a couple things there. I was wondering about you mentioned that at the start the you might be looking at the PFAS issue, and I've been reading some history of water problems, and and you read the history of these things with the PFAS issue and with the TCE in Woburn, Massachusetts, and back to Aaron Brockovich and hexavalent-chromium, and it's all very worrying. So, I was wondering if this was relevant to your models. And then the other one was I was just recently learning about how much that salamanders in the southern Appalachians ate the microinvertebrates that ate up leaves and caused this huge amount of carbon storage. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. Maybe that can also help with the water issue. So you can pick up whatever you want from that.
Thanks, Kevin. Stan, do you want to start with the PFAS question?
Yeah, sure. So, like I mentioned, we had the 5-year National Science Foundation project that was focused on trying to understand salinization of the reservoir, and just to give you a sense of how things work in the real world. I guess when I got here in 2018, I asked Chuck Murray, who was the general manager of Fairfax Water at the time, what kept him up at night, and he said, "Oh, absolutely, it's salt. We've got this rising salinity signal, sodium signal in the reservoir, and if it keeps going, it's going to be our #1 problem." PFAS was nowhere on the horizon, right? And then you roll forward 5 years, and of course, us researchers go out, we start studying things, we get good answers, and then nobody wants it may not be relevant anymore because in the meantime, the water quality or catastrophe du jour has kind of moved on. But anyway, what's I guess really positive about all that is that as I said, we learned a ton about how the system works, what the in-member sources are, how the reservoir is responding over time. A lot was learned, and that information and including models of the reservoir are directly transferable to other tougher contaminants, like PFAS. And so I, together with Fairfax Water and Upper Occoquan Service Authority and a number of jurisdictions, Fairfax County, Prince William County, Prince William Water, and so on, we basically submitted a proposal to the Water Research Foundation, which was funded. And so that has just initiated. We've had our first workshop. We're going to have our second in February. And basically, we're looking at the entire watershed and saying, what is the constellation of potential interventions that we could implement that would get the PFOA and the PFOS concentrations below the EPA MCL. So that's kind of our target. And then how effective would they be? What is the time horizon for their implementation? Who would be responsible for them? Who would pay for them? And so on and so forth. So really trying to get a really comprehensive look at what the possibility space looks like. And then using one of these very quick models in an interactive way to basically dial up or down different sources and see, do we get there? And really looking at the costs of the intervention, is the cost fairly and equitably distributed across the watershed versus, kind of what impact those interventions are going to have in the near and long term for water quality. So anyway, that process is just starting up. And, as we kind of figure everything out, we're going to have a phase where we, basically disclose what we found and get the message out there. So it will be a community effort down the road. Right now, we're just, trying to learn what we need to know in order to say something meaningful.
Great, thanks, Dan. We have quite a few questions here. So David Peterson, do you want to unmute and come in? And while you're doing that, I did see that Emily from Supervisor Bodie's office is here. So thank you, Emily, for being here. And I think a conversation with Stan would be really terrific.
Okay, first I want to just thank the research team for taking their time to talk to us about the new model. It's very interesting. Couple questions. Have any other jurisdictions or locales developed and used an AI-based approach for modeling watersheds? And if they have, how well have these AI-based models performed in terms of accuracy, reliability of their predictions? And then is your plan going forward with this new model being developed and deployed? Are you going to continue maintaining and sustaining the legacy Occoquan watershed model so that we have a comparison benchmark, not just throw away the old model, but continue running it?
David, I'll handle the second part of that question. Then I'll let Siddharth handle the first part. In terms of maintaining the legacy model, the answer is no. And the reason why we're not maintaining it is because the model code itself is no longer being maintained. That was one of the driving forces to having to start looking at new frameworks. US EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers stopped supporting the HSPF model framework in the late 1990s. So because there is no more development of that model, we can't incorporate anything new into it. So while we plan on repeating some of these same analysis with the new model framework to see how they compare. Maintaining that the legacy model is of little value.
Having just add one thing to that. Having said that, the part of the OWMF we have in the suite of models a model that represents the most closely to the current legacy model, with the advantages being that we can auto-calibrate it, we can run it for any number of simulations, and we can produce addressing some of those limitations, but having sort of the same physics behind the existing model. So we are going to have a system in place moving forward that represents fundamentally what the legacy model provided us, in addition to all the other things that we have. So that kind of links to your first question also. So the OWMF essentially is not entirely AI driven. It has physics-based models, it has conceptual models. Depending on what question you come and ask us, that's sort of the most choice of model that goes into it. What AI is essentially what we're planning to use it for is processing all of that information, right? And sort of being something that can take in all of this information coming out of these different models, and depending on what the question comes in, what query we ask or what prompt we provided, it can go to the correct model and provide the correct information. That's sort of the broader picture, long-term goal of where AI might be used. Secondly, where we are using it is actually to help with some of the limitations of some of these existing models, where you might see, like for land use projection, there are several studies that have started to use machine learning based approaches for land use change projection. Although I would like to say that the approach that we have used is sort of based on what we think in combination work the best for processing both text-based as well as spatial information. So really to say that it is sort of state of the art in that sense. But for hydrology, yes, there are jurisdictions that have used it. I do know of the city of Virginia Beach has their entire flood forecasting system now that is run through machine learning AI. So there are folks that are using it. What we intend to use it is to leverage it to improve our existing models and improve some of the speed in some instances, to improve the resolution in some instances, but also be like a overarching LLM that can help address and answer those queries on the fly. That's the vision. That's where we're trying to move towards in the next few years.
Great, thank you. And I see Allison from Chair Jefferson's office is also here. I was looking for you earlier and I didn't see you, so thank you so much for chiming in and making yourself known. So I appreciate you being here as well. We're going to go Veronica and CB Smith, who I think is Cindy, but I'm not positive. So Veronica, do you want to unmute and come in?
Thank you, Ashley, and thanks to the Prince William Conservation Alliance for putting together such a wonderful webinar. And I'm really excited with the presentation, especially with the future predictions. Looking at the updated model of the OWMF, given that our area is fast changing, and we saw that we also have technological input there, like train railway lines, which obviously are coming into the area, looking at the trend of our data centers. How did you do the prediction? My question is, did you integrate LLM? I know you just talked about it. Is it something that you're going to integrate or was used in that prediction? And looking at the changes in terms of water quality, that's where I am really interested to know. Thank you.
That's a brilliant question, right? Really well thought of in terms of like what we could do with, and it's a great suggestion, right? Train lines. And so the question right now, the projection model, even with the new data, is based on open data. All of it is based on historical data that is open. And it's basically saying, can the model look in the past and then look project in the future. That's the baseline. But having said that, the entire process is going to be designed so that we can actually start. We're thinking of how can we incorporate the comprehensive master plans of different counties into the model. So that could be text-based information. We may not know exactly where that development might be happening, or in some instances, when we do know that, the system or the deep learning framework is being developed towards that, the sort of the idea where we want to take it. So we are going to leverage that, and to do that we have to use an LLM, right, where you could put in, say, a developmental master plan into an LLM and then sort of figure out, can you geospatially locate the changes that we might potentially observe in the system, and then integrate those into the model. So there is, there is thought into that, but we haven't really incorporated specific items yet. But if we start getting access to that data and those plans, then certainly that is something that this model would be capable of, because it's just going to be, say, in terms of the modeling itself, it's just another tag that it has to deal with. So in the current scenario, we are going to incorporate, say, resource protection areas, right, where it says there isn't going to be any development, right? So the model needs to know that, well, there isn't going to be any development. So if we do come up with a system that says there is going to be a development in this specific location, that can certainly be incorporated in the framework. So, but great suggestion.
Thank you. So we'll go to CB Smith. If you're still on.
I don't see them anymore, Ashley.
Oh, okay, great. So there's a lot of really great comments in here too. So if anyone has any final comments or questions, go ahead and unmute and come on in.
Karen Sheehan did have a question.
Yes, I
Come on in,
do.
Karen.
Hey, so on the topic of data centers, one of my favorite topics, and impacts to our world, I'm wondering, well, I learned today that the number of diesel generators in Northern Virginia, that number is now over 10,000 diesel generators being used by data centers. And when that is combined with the gas turbines that are being used by data centers, and the fact that data centers are going to be allowed to, through demand response programs, run these diesel generators and gas turbine engines when it's deemed necessary, we're going to have a lot of particulate pollution. And people are very concerned about air pollution, but with what you've outlined with increasing precipitation and added the huge impervious surfaces which we're facing, a lot of those particulates are going to be runoff. So I'm wondering if the new model has been designed such that you will be able to identify to what extent these particulates are polluting the Occoquan Reservoir.
Karen, I'd have to say that the answer to that question is no. And I can probably say that we probably never will. And the reason why I say that is I'm also very active in the Chesapeake Bay program. And as you know, the Chesapeake Bay has an immense model that looks at the Chesapeake Bay as a whole for the water quality of the bay. Part of that modeling process relies on data from the US EPA air program. And the modeling work for that is run on a supercomputer. I don't envision the opportunity where our little program is going to be given an opportunity to purchase and run a supercomputer. It's a great point. There are particulate monitoring devices within the watershed, or I should say throughout Northern Virginia and in the Washington, D.C. metro area. There may be a way that we can incorporate some of that data. I don't know, to be honest with you. This is the first time the subject's been brought up. We can knock some heads together and see if there is something that we can do with it, especially since we are moving into this machine learning AI arena with some of these models. There may be a way of incorporating that. But it would probably be fairly coarse, I would imagine, like I said, given the fact that there are so many aspects to air pollution monitoring that they have to run a supercomputer on it.
Well, I'm not, I know that other organizations are worried about the air pollution. I just think that there is a significant concentration in this area that is going to impact our groundwater, our reservoir, because of these pollutants, because of the data centers. And it should be somehow captured. Anyway.
Yeah, the place where you're going to have to start with that would be with DEQ, and they are the people who control the air program and the data centers and the generators, et cetera. We have no interaction with that whatsoever.
Sooner or later, DEQ is going to have to report the data to EPA about the particulate load from NOx.
Absolutely.
And so that the data could be sliced off of it. It's going to have to be run on the EPA's computer. Sooner or later, they're going to have to admit it's not nothing. And so they're going to have to input the data to the EPA model. And once they have the data, it will give off land deposit as well as surface deposit so that the data will become available.
Elizabeth.
This is the basis of the AIR program.
Yeah. Well, and it's just going to exponentially get worse as we see more and more of these data centers completed, and each one of them has hundreds of diesel generators, if not gas turbine power.
Yeah. Any other last questions? Come on in. You can unmute, and we'll take one more before we wrap up. All right, I think I've allowed the silence to linger long enough for anyone else that had itching questions. I want to thank Siddharth so much for taking the time to put this presentation together, and also Norm and Stan for helping to field all of these really terrific questions. And there's a lot of really great takeaways, and something that really stuck with me was that, Stam noticed that in some of the data, with impervious surfaces as little as 3%, you can start to see impacts in water quality to our streams. And I believe that our watershed is exceeding 10%. And so I think that even though we can't answer all of the questions that we might have, there are some basic common knowledge that we can utilize and implement. And while we are certainly seemingly are asking the question, how much can we build before we break the watershed? Like I said in our op-ed, I think that that's the wrong question. And I think we should be asking, how do we be the best stewards to our drinking water supplies for now and for future generations? So with that, thank you so much for participating in this conversation. We will be providing everyone with a link once we upload it to our YouTube channel. And since you all joined us, you'll also be getting the list. The chat will be included, and there's a lot of really great conversation and resources that are there as well. And I'm sure that Elizabeth will also be writing up a blog, and I can get that to everyone to follow up this conversation. So thank you again. Have a wonderful evening, and stay safe as we get hammered by the snowstorm, and see you all soon.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you so much,
Appreciate it.
everyone.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Siddharth and team.
Yeah, you all are terrific. And
Thanks to the team. Yeah, they do all the work. So.
I'm looking forward to continuing to working with all of you on all of these really great discussions and important topics.
Thank you.
Thank you,
You all.
Thanks so much, Ashley. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, I'll close out. Have a good night, everyone.